Today we are going to discuss about the topic writing the body of the thesis IMRAD. We have Professor Oyedunni here. So over to you, Professor. You can start the session.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll be talking about thesis writing. So this is the topic, writing the body of the thesis. Oftentimes when a student is on the PhD program, these are some of the questions that are asked the candidates. The candidate is asked, what's your research on? Why are you doing it? Why are you going to end up being a teacher? Can't you get a summer job? Why is it that you are doing a PhD? Now, these are some of the questions that PhD students are asked. And sometimes some of these questions also dampen their spirit, especially if they have spent sufficient time program to strengthen our capacity. It comes out smoothly and there is no fourth back in writing. Every thesis has these sections. You have the abstract, you have the introduction, the literature review, the methods, the results, the discussions, and the conclusions. But we are going to look at the introduction, the methodology, the results, and the discussions in details. But it's good for us to talk about everything that. Now, the abstract, even though it's the first thing that will be read in a thesis, is the last to be written because it's a summary of everything that the thesis contains. Now, this is the shape of the thesis. Now, I is for the introduction, the M for the methods, the R for results, and the A is and D for discussion. So the introduction part of it, we are asking the question, why? What is the context of this project? How does it fit in with other research on the topic? What is the research question? So in writing our introduction, these are the questions we should answer. The question of why. Why is that study being done? In methodology is all about how the study was done. Now, this section of the thesis is important because somebody else might look at your study and will want to replicate it in another part of the country or another part of the world. So this has to be as detailed as possible. The reader, how the work was done. Now, the results is also answering the question, what? That is, what was the research question? What are the answers? And these are described in tables, in figures, in addition to the narrative. And the D aspect of it is, so what? You have started from why the study needs to be done. You have told us how the study was done. You have told us what you found. Now, the D is, so what? What is the significance? What is the relevance? What is the implication? What are the recommendations? What else should somebody else do in terms of if somebody else wants to look at a similar subject? What are the areas the person will look at? So now we'll take them one after the other, starting with I, which is the introduction. The key question to ask in writing the introduction part of the thesis is what types of information should be included in the introduction. That will guide our thoughts in making sure that we don't just continue to write and at the end of the day, nothing in the introduction. There are three main things that the introduction does. One, it helps to establish art. What I mean by that is trying to say a little of the literature review relating to the study. It is this paragraph that we define the terms, that we define the scope of the study. Also in this chapter, it's where we will establish a niche for ourselves. We will outline what the current situation is. We would evaluate the current situation. And this is what we do when we say the statement of the problem. What is the current situation? What be? And so it's in this chapter that the gap needed or the gap that will be filled by the study is identified, the problem is stated. And then, having done that, we now identify the importance of the research, and that is the section where we say significance of the study. We will talk about the research questions. What questions would this study be? Talk about the objectives. The objectives are the milestones to achieve, or the milestones, the pathway to follow in answering the research questions. Then we will state the hypothesis and then give an outline of what other information one should look out for. Now that takes us to literature review. Now by the time we finish writing our introduction, where we have given a general background, where we have identified the gap, the problem that our study will be solving, the gap in literature that our research will be filling. We have stated our objectives, the research questions, the objectives, why the study is important. Now, the next thing is to do a literature review. And the literature review is that section of the thesis that helps to situate our study body of knowledge and is an important aspect of the thesis. So a literature review is the overview of research topic and answers to related research questions. It's an important part of research and it should be treated as such. So a well-written literature review would organize literature, would evaluate literature, would identify patterns and trends, and then synthesize literature. So what that means is that when you are going to do a literature review, you have your research objectives to guide you. You may divide your literature review into two. The first part can be conceptual review. For example, if you are working on diabetes, for example, the first part will be conceptual review of what diabetes is, like some historical perspective of diabetes. Now, the second part will be the conceptual review. That is, the empirical review. That is different studies that people have done in relation to the objectives of your study. And so why do we need to do the literature? One, the literature would help us to find out what information already exists in the field of research. Sometimes when you take people's thesis, the first question you ask yourself is, what is new? What is this person contributing? So literature review will help us to identify the information that are existing. And from the existing literature, we'll be able to identify the gaps. Yes, people have worked on utilization of reproductive health services among young people. What else have people not looked at? Yes, people have talked about utilization, cancer preventive services among the men, screening services among men or women. Yes, a lot of work has been done. Then from the information that existed, we'll be able to say, oh, okay, nobody has looked at this particular aspect. Is it because as the studies they found, are they essentially hospital-based? Oh, nobody has looked at the community aspect of it. Or nobody has heard from those who are directly affected by the subject of inquiry. Then it will also help us to find out different works that have been done. Through literature review, we can identify main methodologies that have been used in relation to that. Now, why is that important? That is important because you don't want to waste scarce resources to deploy a methodology that has been found not to work. So if we don't do proper literature search, the tendency is to use the same methodology that other people have used, and then they met a brick wall, nothing added. So it will help us to identify what works and help us to be able to combine different methodologies, different strategies, different research techniques to get the best from our study. Literature review will also help us identify main ideas, conclusions, and theories, and establish similarities and differences. It will also provide a context for our research, and it will show relationships between previous studies. So literature review will help us know which conceptual or theoretical framework can be deployed to explain our study. And there are different types of literature review that can be done depending on the focus of your study. It can be an argumentative review, and an argumentative review is a type of review that examines and analyzes literature in order to support an argument. It can be integrative review, it can be historical review, it can be methodological review, it can be systematic review or theoretical review. Whichever one you would adopt will depend on what your research topic is, what your research objectives, because your research objectives guide what to look for in literature. So these are frequently asked questions on literature review. The first question is, what is it? It's an evaluation of previous research on a topic. We are asking the question, why are we doing literature review? It provides background information needed. It assures our readers that we are familiar with the research we are carrying out, and it establishes our study as one link in a chain of research that is developing and enlarging knowledge. We also ask the question, it also asks the questions, how do I organize it? Am I organizing it around key themes or debates? Am I looking at generic knowledge? Am I looking at methodological approach? We are also looking and asking the question, what referencing system should I use? Now, referencing systems vary by university. Some universities will use APA format. Some universities will use Vancouver. So it's important that you know which reference system, a document that has the instructions in terms of formatting to be followed. So it will also, another question is, how do I refer to other authors? Now, this also depends format you are using. But if you are using the name within the text, it also depends. Now, it depends on how you want the name. For example, if you want to lay emphasis on what was said, you will start with what was said and put the name of the author in parentheses. But if the focus is on the author, you start with the name of the author and put the year in brackets. Also, another question to ask is, how long should be the literature review? Should it be like 50% of the entire thesis? But the rule of the thumb is that around 15 to 30% of the entire thesis should be your literature review. Or another thing that can guide is that the thesis is expected to be 60% of your work. So if your literature review is more than 40% of your thesis, then it's probably too long. So between 15 to 30% of the whole thesis would be fine. Another question is, what am I supposed to do in my literature? You recognize relevant and important research in your field. You understand the research, you look at them, you evaluate them. You are not just supposed to see a reference and just copy it like that. You're supposed to read it. You're supposed to synthesize it. You're supposed to summarize it so that you bring out the key issues as it relates to your work, so that we can see the gap that your study is trying to fill. So the literature review is not linear. It's not a linear process. You start with your research objectives, you define parameters, you generate and refine keywords. For example, you are finding breastfeeding practices among mothers of children under 5. If you are going to do your literature review, you look at what your objective is. For example, if one of your objectives is prevalence of exclusive breastfeeding, so you define the parameters, you look at what keywords you are going to put in your search engine. Now, when you put the keywords in your search engine, it produces different references for you. You look at those references, then you go back again. If you don't get what you want, you go back again. You redefine parameters. Maybe if you use different combination of keywords, whether you get better references. So it's cyclical. And by the time you do that, you look at what you have, you synthesize it, you look at it. By the time you are satisfied that, yes, you already found what you are looking for, looking at regional and putting regional and geographical consideration in place, then you can begin to write your. Now we are done with literature review. The next thing is the methodology section. Now the methodology section of a thesis is the easiest to write. The questions you are asking in methodology is who. When you are asking the question who, you are talking about your study participants. You are asking the question what, you are asking the question when, you are asking the question where. Now, when you ask the question where, you are talking about your study setting, how it is your methodology. Why? So methodology section is often the easiest to write, and it outlines the method you use and why. So the methodology section should have a bit of introduction of what to expect in that chapter. Then you talk about your research design. Are you using a cross-sectional study design? Are you doing an experimental study? Are you doing a quasi-experimental study? Are you doing a case control? Are you doing longitudinal study? You need to tell us after that general introduction. Now you need to now talk about your population and sampling. Who are your study population? Going by the example I used, as exclusive breastfeeding among women of children under 5. Now your study population will be women of reproductive age who have children under 5. Now you can't use all of that population. The next thing is you tell us how would you sample your population for how will you get a sample, a subset sample from that population in such a way that you can generalize your findings. Because if you have a study and you choose a sample of that population that we cannot generalize your findings, then you will not have done justice to all the resources that have gone into it. Then you talk about your data collection methods. Did you do a mixed study where you did both quantitative and qualitative? Did you do all qualitative study? Did you do just quantitative study? You need to tell us. You need to talk about the procedure. How did you go about it? Under the procedure, you are going to talk about the instruments used for the study. You are going to talk about how the instrument was validated. You are going to talk about the data collection procedure. Did you use research assistants? Were they trained? Who are they? You talk about their characteristics. You talk about their educational level. You talk about, you give the criteria with which you selected your study population. And so if you are looking at, and then you go and say your research assistant is a man, because how would a man now be able to relate with a woman and collect sensitive information? So all of these are what you would describe under the research procedures. Then you talk about your data analysis. In data analysis, you tell us the data you have collected, how would you analyze them? If you did an all quantitative study, how would you analyze them? Are you using descriptive statistics? Are you using inferential statistics? What type of inferential statistics are you using? Are you using chi-square? Are you using ANOVA? Are you using logistic regression? Depending on what your objectives. And if you did a qualitative study, how are you going to analyze the qualitative study? Are you going to do thematic analysis, or you are going to use software? Are you using Atlas TI? Are you using NVivo? These are all the things we expect to see in data analysis. And then, more importantly, the ethical consideration. Did you take ethical approval for the study? Also, depending on who your study population, who they are. For instance, if you are looking at children under 18, it means they are minor. It means they themselves cannot give you consent. So You have to take consent from their parents and get their own. Now, if you are working with persons with disabilities, for example, they are a vulnerable population, and you need to tell us how their rights have been protected by your study. This is a major part of the methodology. And then you do a summary. Excuse me. You do a summary of three types of research design. You can have quantitative, you can have qualitative, you can have mixed method. Mixed method is where you have both quantitative and qualitative together. You can have an analytical study. So if you say your research design is quantitative, are you doing a non-experimental one? If it's a non-experimental one, that is where you tell us, oh, my study design is descriptive, cross-sectional, or a correlational study. Now, if you are doing an experimental study, are you doing a true experimental study? Is where both the experimental group and the control group are matched age for age, sex for sex. Now, a quasi-experimental study is the ones that they are not really as strictly matched as you find in the true experiment. And then the single subject experimental is where the same group serve as their own control. Now, if you are doing an all qualitative study, are you looking at ethnography, phenomenology, case study, grounded theory? If you are using analytical design, is it concept analysis or historical analysis? So these are the different types of research design available. Now, the next thing on that our chart is population and sampling. You need to describe the population of your study. Like I said, using exclusive breastfeeding as an example. Your population for that are women in reproductive within the reproductive age who have children under 5. That is the population. Now, you now need to take, since you cannot access all of them, you don't have all the resources to access all of them, then you now take a subset from that sample. I have to describe the method that is used. Now, we're going to quickly look at the difference of sampling. There are two major types of sampling: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Now, probability sampling is such that everybody in that population has an opportunity of being selected to be part of the study. And the non-probability one is such that it is not, is more judgmental, is more biased than you find in probability sampling. And there are 4 major types of probability sampling. We have the systematic, the cluster, the simple random, the stratified. For non-probability, you have the snowball, the quota, the judgment, and the convenience. And we are going to look at each of them, and quickly. Now, probability sampling. The most basic of the probability sampling is the simple random sampling. Now, the simple random sampling is a technique where there's an equal chance of each member of the population to get selected from a sample. And one good example of simple random sampling is the ballot. So you roll everybody's name, put them in a bowl, you shake it, you pick randomly. So everybody has equal opportunity to do that. But we know that using simple random sampling possible when we have large population. We can only use it where we have a small manageable population. But where you have a large population, simple random sampling may not be possible, but it's the most basic of these probability sampling methods. Now we have the second one, which is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a sampling method where multiple clusters of people are created from a population where they are indicative of homogeneous characteristics and have an equal chance of being selected. In cluster sampling, we would have grouped them according to clusters of similarity. Maybe those who are living in the peri-urban area, put them together as a cluster. Those who are living in the rural area, they will form a cluster. Those who are living in transitional area will form a cluster. The second one is systematic sampling. And systematic sampling is a probability technique in which every member of the group is selected at regular intervals to form a sample using systematic. So it can be either every third person, or every fifth person. There is a formula for calculating the interval for systematic population sampling. So we now have the stratified random sampling, which is also called random quota sampling. And in this method, it involves the division of known as strata, and strata are formed based on members' shared attributes or characteristics such as income or educational attainment, and then we choose from each of the strata. Now that takes us to the non-probability sampling. Is one of the non-probability methods. A non-probability sampling is used to create a sample due to accessibility, readiness to be part of the study, or availability at a given time. So at a given time. If you look at the picture that is here, the researcher just got people who are available at the time of the study and who were willing to participate. So in non-probability sampling, there is no equal chance of participation. In judgmental sampling, judgmental is also purposive sampling. And here, it is based on the judgment of the researcher to decide who he or she is going to choose to be part of the study, in which the researchers form a sample based on certain predetermined traits or qualities. Then we have snowball. Snowball sampling is a non-probability sampling technique where existing study recruits future subjects from among their acquaintances. So you use snowball where either your subject of inquiry is rare, or where you find it difficult getting the next participant. For example, if you want to people who use drugs, or you want to talk to people who have been sexually violated, you are not likely to get them openly to come out to say, yes, I've been a victim. So once you are able to get the first participant, now the first participant will refer you to another person, will link you up with another person. So that other person too will link you up with a second set of participants. So that is how snowball is. Or you want to interview groups of traditional healers, for example, you are not likely to find a register containing all of them, or they are not even likely to talk to you. But once you get one, it links you to the other one. That other one also link you up with the next one. So that takes us to data collection methods. In collecting data, we can either collect primary data or secondary data. And examples of primary data are our surveys, that is our questionnaire data, the interviews, different interviews that we carry out, opinion polls. Now, secondary data are existing records that we access for information. And so these are the different types of primary data. Your primary data can be quantitative, can be objective, because you are doing a survey or an observation data, and it can be qualitative if you do a focus group interview or in-depth interview. And these are the different sources of secondary data where you can get them different examples of secondary data. Now that takes us to methods of data collection, depending on our objectives, depending on what we are looking for. We can either use observation, we can either use interview, either key informant interview, in-depth interview, depending on the subject of inquiry. We can use questionnaire, and we can use existing database, for example, the demographic health survey data we can use that and do secondary analysis. So it also depends on what our focus is, what data we are collecting. Now, we have to talk about how we recruit our research assistants if we are using them. We have to talk about what their characteristics, recruit training. We have to talk about how the instrument we are using is validated. So we need to talk about validity and reliability of our data collection instruments. We have to talk about how we are going to analyze our data. We have to talk about ethical considerations. And then after we have taken care of all of this, that is when we go out to collect. So it's also in this chapter, which is chapter 3, that we talk about the scope of our study. Now, the scope of our study, what are we covering? So in this study, we are going to look at knowledge. We are going to look at practice. Now, we're also going to talk about the limitation of the study. It is in this chapter that we talk about that. Then the data analysis process. When we collect our data, we clean the data. When we clean the data, data cleaning means when we enter it into the computer, for example, we want to be sure that all the data checks are followed. When somebody has ticked a yes on the questionnaire and you are entering it into the analysis software, somebody did not mistakenly pick a no. So we look at all of this before we start the data analysis. And then you visualize the study. First of all, run the frequency data. It gives you first-hand information of what the data you have collected looks like. And then from that frequency distribution, you begin to say, okay, what are the key variables? What are my dependent and independent variables? What am I finding out? Which ones am I going to use to answer my hypothesis? So it could be inferential, it could be predictive, it could be prescriptive, or it could be text analysis, which is if you are doing a qualitative data. So, and it could be a combination of all of this. Now that takes us to the results chapter. That is the results section is fundamental because it shows the new ideas or the new facts that your study is bringing on board. Now the goal of this chapter is to put forward your data, not to draw inference from it. I've gone through many theses, their results section, as they are presenting the results, they are trying to discuss it, they are trying to interpret. The results chapter is just for you to present your data as it is. Just present it without trying to make any inference or any interpretation. And so we need to present the important information that we have without interpreting them. So just present your results as you have it. And a tip for presenting good results is, if you are using a questionnaire, for example, is for you to follow the different sections of your questionnaire, starting with the socio-demographic section, then you go section by section like that. So that is a good way of presenting your results. So also in writing results, you are asking yourself, what should I be doing? Your result is like a storytelling. You are presenting your results. So it is narrative. You are telling us a story. So bear that in mind, that your results section is narrative. You are telling a beautiful story of what you found. So these are different tips for writing good results. Focus on the relevant results. Always refer to your methodology, avoid repetition, and we need to read through our results. Oftentimes, many have gone through many theses, grammatical errors. So after writing it, you need to edit it, you need to proofread it. You may have to give it to a language editor to edit it for you. Now, the G of the IMRAD, which is the discussion. So what are we going to be doing at the discussion level? It is the most interesting chapter to write because the researcher starts to integrate the different phases of the story in order to draw conclusions or develop a theory or come up with a model. So when you are discussing, you are going back to your objectives. you are trying to say, oh, now and you are also referring back to your literature review. Now you found that in your own study, there are more men than women, but other studies have been saying there are more women than men. Now the question is, you start to ask yourself and tell us, why do you think that is so? Is it because is it because of the area where the study was conducted? So this is where you begin to draw conclusions, looking at your own results within existing body of knowledge. So in discussion, you have your data, the information. Now you are now helping us to understand the concepts, the context, and at the end of the chapter 5, we have a takeaway message to say that this is the key information or key result that this had given us. Oh, okay. They started off by identifying this research gap. Now they have been able to fill that gap. And if they are not able to fill the gap, this is where to say what the limitations were that prevented them from filling the gap that was identified earlier. So in chapter 5, we are looking at the degree of discussion and lessons learned. At the wisdom stage, which is at the apex, we are looking at what knowledge has been gained, what experience has been gained, and good judgment. At the understanding level, we are linking our results to the existing knowledge. This is where we say, oh, this study is in consonance with the study of ABC, or this study is at variance with what XYZ had found. At the knowledge level, we are interpreting our statistical values. We are saying our hypothesis. We started off with a null to say there'll be no difference, group A and group B. And our findings have shown that there's a difference. So you would interpret that statistical value that you have found. At the information level, you are telling us the values that you got. And so in writing the discussion chapter, we are asking the question, so what? So you look at your research objectives, you look at your literature, you look at the method, look at that vis-a-vis your findings. So for research objective 1, what are the findings? Are those findings consistent with what is in literature, or is it new knowledge? What has the methodology done? I have used a separate methodology. I still found the same thing. Oh, I found something different. Could it be that my methodology is superior to existing methodologies? Can I now make a case for the adoption of my own methodology over and above existing methodology? So that is what we will be doing in our discussion chapter. So this is where you discuss everything, but we have to be succinct, concise, not too many words. It is this chapter that we present our interpretations, our opinions, and the main function is to answer the question and explain why we have found what we have found. So don't repeat results. I've seen many theses that they are repeating results again in discussion. No, you are not supposed to. You are just supposed to explain your findings. Don't repeat the results. Is important. So you need to organize your discussion section. You need to organize your thoughts. You need to discuss from specific to general. You need to use the same key terms. Now, this is important. In writing the thesis, the first chapter is in the present tense because you are telling us what you are doing. Now, the methodology section is in the past tense because the study has been done. So you write it in past tense. And the discussion section, you write in present tense. You discuss each hypothesis separately and you explain your findings. You look at your findings critically in relation to other findings. You try to explain why you are finding what you are finding, and then you need to defend your answer. So generally, also in doing literature review, part of what you do in discussion section is also literature review, because you are going to be supporting your findings with what you have. You say how it does that. And so when discussing unexpected finding, Begin the paragraph with the finding and then describe it. Also identify potential limitations and weaknesses and comment on the relative importance of this to your interpretation of the results. This is important because sometimes with recommendation, blanket applicability, no. In this chapter 5 is where you say, now these findings of this study should be generalized with caution, and you tell us the reason why. Or you say these findings can only be generalized to people living in this area. So you need to tell us the limitations of the generalization of the result. And you don't have to be apologetic. This is what you have found, and you have presented what you have found. Also, you need to identify potential limitations and weaknesses that help explain unexpected findings. It may be in the sampling, it may be in the demography of the respondents. It may be a limitation in data collection process or the analysis. It's important to be as factual one can be. And then when you have done all of that, you need to talk about the implications of your findings, and you need to summarize this. And this is where people talk about future research, suggestions for future research. We talk about new theories that had come out from that study. It talks about how the findings of the study can be applied for theoretical implications. You will talk about the fact that is this study bringing a new theory, or is supporting an existing one, or is providing new insights into existing theory. For practical implications, you talk about how the findings can be deployed at the community, at the policy level, at the service delivery level, depending on what you have worked on. So your implications for future research is part of your recommendations. And so the recommendations should be based on the findings. Don't give recommendation from what you think should be in your heart. Every recommendation must come from your result. We should be able to link it. If you look at a recommendation, we should be able to go back to your result section and say, oh, okay, this recommendation is because of these findings. The different sections of a thesis, we have looked at the key sections. That's the introduction, the methodology, the results, and the discussion, and what we should do in each of those sections, and why it's important, streamlined, why it's important to objectives that are achievable, why it's important to help give our work to language editors to help us read through to ensure that grammatical errors not done. And so the conclusion part of the study is the climax of the thesis, tie the different sections of the thesis together into a whole. So when we open your conclusion section of your thesis, you should start from the broad objective, the methodology, and the results. You'll be able to tie everything together in the conclusion. And so we should also mind our language in presenting that, so that we don't present a wrong conclusion for the data that we have conducted. So our conclusion section should be brief. We should have brief introduction. We should relate the results to research question. We should mention the contribution of the research to our area of study. And it's also advisable for the researcher to give his or her own opinion on the effect of the study. We should outline the limitations of the study. In carrying out the study, we need to talk about what challenges we faced. So we need to provide suggestions for future research, and conclusion will flow logically, and we should avoid presenting new materials or figures in the conclusion. So conclusion is not a section where we will start to give new data. Since a conclusion of everything that we have presented earlier, and the conclusion should concisely demonstrate that the purpose of the research has been successfully achieved. So there are common mistakes mistakes that we should also beware of when writing our thesis. In writing our result, if we did a quantitative study, don't just give numbers. Don't just say 50%. Tell us the results. If we did a quantitative study, a common mistake is for us to just keep giving figures that really will not make any sense to the person reading. We should not be afraid to ask for help. We should make sure that we are using proper formatting, and that is why ask your university for guidelines of how the thesis should be presented. We shouldn't put too many charts there. If many of us like colors, beautiful things, but if there are too many, it also can be counterproductive. So if you are going to use figures or charts, we should do beautiful charts that are very sharp, and every chart, every figure is supposed to speak for itself, and we shouldn't put figures that are irrelevant. We shouldn't put irrelevant information. Sometimes we trust the computers to spell for us, but we need to know that, for example, some universities use American English. And so if your computer is using British English, then it's some challenge for you. Many universities are British universities, and your computer will give you American spelling. So we shouldn't trust computers to do spell check for us. Also, we should not be afraid to ask a friend to read for us. Because one thing we have found is that if it is your work and you read over and over, you won't see the mistakes anymore. But somebody who is taking that thesis for the first time would easily identify errors that are there. And so in summary, we have looked at tips, we have looked at common mistakes that we should avoid. And so consult guidelines for instructions. And when you're at crossroads, don't be too shy, afraid to ask your guide for instructions. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you, Professor, for a wonderful speech. Dear attendees, do you have any queries regarding the presentation? You may raise the hand. I can ask the professor.
Okay, good afternoon, Prof. and all, and the organizers. Thank you very much for the well-explained and analyzed lecture. In fact, it was wonderful. I hope that the slides will also be made available for us. In fact, I have really gained a lot, as if I've not been going through these things over and over again. This is different, writing the body of a thesis. It was really wonderful. Once again, thank you very much. We appreciate you for the time and the details you've given to us. And then I want you to maybe, I'm Bassey Grace. I'm a PhD holder in Texila, American University, and by God's grace, I hope to round up by November. And then I want to talk about referencing in the body of the thesis. Different people, they all have the various formats. For example, you want to slot in your references. You write et al., you write et, and then all, al, then full stop and comma, and then the year, you bracket. And then some people, they want you to write otherwise. I mean, different ways of writing. I don't know. And then you talked about Texila format. Please, I want you to once again and just go through referencing in the body of the thesis, and also our format in the main references again. Which one is really acceptable? Sorry, I've taken you back. Thank you very much. God bless you, and over.
Thank you very much for your questions and for the comments. They are appreciated. Every university has their format. It depends on whether you are using APA format. APA means American Psychologists Association format, or you are using Vancouver format. In the APA format, when you want to cite reference in the body of the thesis, the first time you are citing the reference, you list all the names of the authors, their surname. If there are 5, you list all the 5. Then the next time you are going to mention is when you use et al. Now, if there are more than 6, you list the first 6 and then put et al. If there are 2, you list the 2. If there are 3, you use the 3 the first time you are mentioning them, and then subsequently you use et al. Now, it now depends on the format or the style that the university is using. Some will use the style that you put the numbers below to say number 1 is referring to this, number 2 is this. Others will prefer that you put the surname and the date within the text. So Texila American University would give you, I'm sure they have a booklet, all this information. Ask your guide, they will make that available for you. So if you have many authors, more than 6, you first of all have to list the first 6 before et al. If there are 5 in number, the first time you are mentioning them, you list out all of them and the year. But then subsequently, you now use et al. And the year before you close the brackets. I hope I have answered your question.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, there are some questions here. Let me quickly answer them. There are some questions in the chat box. Somebody says, as a researcher, can I engage a statistician? You have to ask the statistician, explain what he or she has done for you, because it's your work and you are the one going to defend that thesis. So you can employ them, but you need, because you have to give them your hypothesis that you want to test. So when they do it for you, they have to explain what they have done for you, because it's your work, you need to own it. So we need to know a little bit of statistics, but it's allowed to give your work to them, but they have to explain to you so that you understand what formula they have given you and the reason why they have used that formula, so that you are not just looking at it as Greek. Another person asked, Zachary said, literature review and discussions have always been the challenging sections, especially avoiding repeating results. Please, can we see some example of good discussion? I have tried to explain how we can write good discussion. I have also explained how to do an effective literature review. I would, after this session, give my slide to the coordinator. I'm sure they will then share it with you so that you'll be able to go through them again and understand some of these questions that you are writing. To determine sample size. Now there are formulas for determining sample size if you are going to use if you are going to use probability sampling methods. You have simple formula for calculating sample size. Also, now it also then depends. If you are doing an intervention study, you have a different formula for calculating sample size for analytical study or for intervention study. I assume those would have been taught in your statistics class. That's why I didn't bother to talk about it, but there are different methods. It's in the qualitative that you don't calculate sample size because you are using non-probability sampling method, and you stop talking to people or stop recruitment of people when you are no longer getting new information. For instance, if you want to use key informant interview, by the time you interview the 5th or the 6th person and you are not getting anything new, then we say you have attained saturation. That is, you are not likely to be getting anything new again, then you stop that. Kindly explain the right way to write a problem statement. What should constitute a good problem statement? A good problem statement is such that you are able to look at what is and what should be. For example, if you are looking at use of antenatal, pregnant women accessing antenatal care, you look at what does WHO say about antenatal care attenders? At least 4 focused antenatal care, 4 visits. That is what is expected. But what is happening? Some don't even go at all. That is the problem. Why is it that they are not going? Have people looked at reasons why they are not going? Oh, okay. People have said they are not going because of ABC. However, there is still something that is lacking. Is it because they have not involved their husbands in this? That that is how you craft statements of the problem. When you don't find literature in your topic, what do you do under literature review? It's not likely that you will not find at all. You may not find enough literature, or you may not find literature from your part of the world concerning what you want to do. And so that itself is a justification for the study, that not many people have looked into that phenomenon in the area that you are. But you will find something, it may not be in your part of the world, it may be in other parts of the world. So it's not likely that you will not find any that will be there. So if you are not finding anything, then check your search words, the words that you are using to search for your literature. Check it. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Dear attendees, do you have any queries? Our team will be assist you. And once again, thank you for attending our webinar. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.